Persian Gulf is far more than a simple body of water. It is a volatile global choke point governed ruthlessly by the laws of physics and geography. 30% of the entire world's seaborne crude oil navigates through a precarious channel that narrows dangerously to a mere 21 miles wide at its tightest point. For the United States Navy, this confined geometry transforms a superpower's greatest strategic asset into a calculated liability that cannot be easily mitigated by technology alone. A Nimitz-class carrier battle group reigns as an apex predator in the open ocean, capable of projecting devastating power across thousands of miles of deep blue water. But inside the claustrophobic Strait of Hormuz, that same invincible carrier becomes a massive, high-value target trapped in a predictable vector with zero room to maneuver. The Iranian naval strategy is not built on the futile hope of matching American tonnage or achieving technological superiority in a direct, symmetrical engagement. Tehran understands perfectly that destroying the United States Navy is unnecessary when the strategic objective is simply to deny access to the theater of operations completely. This is the defining doctrine of anti-access, area denial, executed not with a single crushing hammer blow, but with 1,000 sharp needles striking simultaneously. Modern naval warfare has fundamentally shifted from traditional contests of raw power to brutal, unforgiving equations of cost efficiency, saturation attacks, and operational friction. The adversary does not need to win the battle in a conventional sense. They only need to make the theater strictly uninhabitable for the invading force. Iran has spent decades turning the Gulf's northern coastline into a complex, layered kill box of asymmetric threats that defy standard countermeasures and defensive protocols. The geography itself is weaponized, with rocky islands serving as unsinkable aircraft carriers and static missile platforms that blend seamlessly into the rugged, mountainous terrain. Shallow waters and complex thermal layers in the Gulf create acoustic anomalies that effectively blind the most sophisticated sonar systems deployed by Western naval forces. Into this hostile environment, the U.S. Navy must deploy assets worth billions of dollars against swarming threats that cost only thousands to manufacture and deploy. The staggering economic disparity of this exchange creates a strategic leverage that defies conventional military calculus and forces commanders to rethink their engagement rules. An asymmetrical war is won not by the side with the biggest guns, but by the side that masters the most efficient mathematical equation of destruction. The first layer of this denial strategy relies on the sheer, overwhelming saturation of the maritime battle space with hundreds of small, agile, inextricable units. We begin with the concept of the swarm, a chaotic, coordinated assault designed specifically to overwhelm the targeting computers of advanced defensive systems. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy operates thousands of small, fast attack craft equipped with heavy machine guns, rockets, and man-portable air defense systems. Individually, a generic fiberglass speedboat is a mere nuisance. Effectively coordinated in a pack of 100, it transforms into a lethal, irresistible threat. Radar systems on a modern destroyer are designed to track high-velocity missiles and aircraft, not hundreds of small surface skimmers moving erratically in the clutter. The Aegis combat system can track multiple targets simultaneously, but every digital system has a saturation point where processing power fails under the load of data. A swarm attack forces the defender to expend distinct, limited, and expensive munitions on cheap, expendable fiberglass hulls that can be replaced within days. The kinetic exchange ratio here is disastrous for the capital ship, trading million-dollar interceptors for civilian-grade boats that cost less than a luxury car. These small boats move erratically, using the coastline's radar clutter to mask their signatures until they are within the final, deadly approach vector. At close range, the minimum engagement distance of heavy ship-to-ship missiles renders them effectively useless against targets that are practically hugging the hull. The destroyer is forced to rely on close-in weapon systems, which can be quickly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming fire from multiple angles. This is the democratization of lethality. Mass production defeats precision engineering through simple, brutal attrition that no budget can indefinitely sustain. The swarm is not designed to sink the carrier immediately, but to strip away its defensive screen of escorts, leaving the high-value target vulnerable. By forcing the battle group to contract its formation for protection, the swarm opens clear vectors for heavier, more destructive strikes from land-based missiles. Psychological friction is also a potent weapon. The constant threat of a swarm keeps crews at exhausting battle stations for days on end. Fatigue degrades decision-making cycles, leading to hesitation or critical errors that the adversary will ruthlessly exploit at the moment of maximum vulnerability. But the surface swarm is only the visible component of a multi-domain trap set decades in the making, waiting beneath the waves for the opportune moment. Beneath the waves, the Iranians have prepared a silent, static threat that capitalizes on the Gulf's shallow depth to deny movement to larger vessels.
A century apart, but the impact remains the same. While the methods have changed, the environmental scars run deeper than ever before.
The Strait of Hormuz is shallow enough to be mined effectively across its entire navigable width, creating an invisible wall of high explosives. Iran possesses an arsenal estimated at over 6,000 mines, ranging from simple contact devices to smart sensors that can discriminate between targets. Smart mines lie dormant on the seabed, listening patiently for the specific acoustic signature of a target vessel before activating their deadly payload. They can be programmed to count ships, ignoring the first 3 escorts to detonate specifically under the unarmored hull of a supercarrier or tanker. Mine warfare is psychological warfare. The mere suspicion of a minefield halts commercial traffic and naval maneuvers instantly, freezing the battle space in place. Clearing a minefield is a slow, methodical, and dangerous process that robs a fleet of its speed, maneuverability, and tactical initiative. While the fleet is stalled, clearing narrow lanes, it becomes a stationary target for the other layers of the defense, including missiles and drones. This integration of obstacles creates a deadly kill zone, where mobility is restricted, evasion becomes impossible, and the attacker dictates the terms of engagement. The mine does not need to sink the ship. Damaging a rudder or propeller acts as a mission kill that effectively removes the asset from combat. A damaged carrier in the narrow strait becomes a navigational hazard, blocking the lane for the entire fleet and creating a logistical nightmare. The cost to deploy a mine is roughly a few $1,000s. The cost to repair a carrier runs into the billions and takes years to complete.
If we authorize this strike, we risk full regional destabilization.
Calculating the political cost of a potential disaster before ordering the fleet forward. Deterrence works when the cost of intervention exceeds the value of the objective, regardless of the ultimate military outcome of the conflict. But if the fleet attempts to push through the minefields, they activate the third layer of the Iranian defense, the coastal missile batteries. Hidden within the rugged topography of the coastline are mobile missile batteries waiting for a firing solution, invisible to radar until the moment of launch. Mobile coastal defense units create a profound and unsolvable problem of target acquisition for any attacking naval force attempting to penetrate the cordon. A missile truck can emerge from a hardened tunnel, fire its payload, and relocate to a secondary hide site before the launch smoke even clears. Iran's coastline is topographically complex, filled with jagged ridgelines and canyons that effectively mask radar signatures and hide thousands of potential launcher positions. This terrain allows defenders to employ aggressive shoot and scoop tactics that render counter-battery fire largely ineffective against the mobile launcher units. The missiles themselves, like the Noor or the supersonic Khalij Fars, are optimized specifically for this operational theater and its unique constraints. In the open ocean, a ship's radar horizon provides ample warning time to detect, track, and engage incoming aerial threats from long distances. Inside the Gulf, the close proximity of the shore compresses the reaction window to mere seconds, stripping the commander of vital decision-making time. An anti-ship cruise missile launched from 20 miles away gives the Phalanx close-in defense system almost zero margin for error or correction. The physics of the engagement overwhelmingly favor the aggressor who
within
controls
acceptable
the launch
deviation.
time, the attack vector,
Analysis
and
complete.
the element of surprise. Furthermore, these batteries do not rely solely on active radar that would instantly reveal their position to prowling electronic warfare aircraft. They utilize passive optical tracking and secure data links from observer drones to acquire targets silently without ever emitting a detectable electronic signal. This silent targeting creates a terrifying cold launch scenario where the U.S. fleet does not detect the threat until missile ignition occurs. Saturation remains the guiding principle. A single destroyer can shoot down 4 missiles, but the mathematics change drastically against a volley of 14.
It's overloading. I can't bypass the safeties.
Shut it down now. All weapon systems, manual override.
Control loops through sheer density of incoming fire. Even if the ship survives the kinetic impact, the massive expenditure of interceptor missiles leaves it critically vulnerable to the inevitable second wave. Modern destroyers have deep magazines, and reloading vertical launch systems at sea in a combat zone is physically impossible. Once the magazines are empty, a multi-billion-dollar warship becomes nothing more than a floating steel target, unable to defend itself or project power. This reality forces the fleet to keep its distance, ceding control of the vital waterways to the adversary rather than risking capital assets. But the threat from the land is matched by a threat designed specifically for the Gulf's unique and challenging hydrography. The Persian Gulf is a remarkably shallow basin, with an average depth of only 50 meters in many strategically critical sectors. This environment is a tactical nightmare for large nuclear-powered attack submarines designed for deep ocean, blue water intercepts, and high-speed maneuvers. Large submarines inevitably struggle to maneuver and hide in waters that are barely deeper than their own hull height, risking detection or collision. Iran exploits this limitation by deploying a fleet of midget submarines.
As you can see, the Iranian Ghadir-class submarine is
These vessels are small, agile, and incredibly difficult to detect using standard active sonar due to the chaotic acoustics of shallow water. The Gulf's complex thermal layers and high salinity create natural blind spots where sound waves refract, bend, and effectively disappear. A Ghadir-class submarine can sit silently on the seabed, powering down its engines to become a literal hole in the water, invisible to sensors. It waits in ambush for a target to pass overhead, executing a point-blank torpedo attack with zero warning and high probability of kill. The acoustic clutter of commercial traffic and oil drilling operations further masks the mechanical signature of these small, elusive submarines.
While battery power offers quiet efficiency, nuclear pumps generate immense, often overwhelming noise.
By a nuclear reactor. This creates a tactical paradox, where the most advanced sonar suites in the world are baffled and defeated by technology from the 1950s. The threat is not just torpedoes. These mini-subs are also capable of laying mines in previously cleared channels, resetting the danger level. They act as force multipliers, injecting uncertainty into every movement the adversary attempts to make below the surface of the contested waters.
Multiple contacts, deploying active sonar buoys now.
Sonar buoy deployed, bearing 090.
Roger that, tightening the surface ships. Hunting a dozen silent, small targets in noisy, shallow water consumes disproportionate amounts of time, fuel, and specialized sensor resources. Every hour spent hunting a midget sub is an hour the carrier group is not conducting offensive strike operations against the enemy. This is the essence of denial, converting the attacker's time and focus into a resource that is wasted on defensive maneuvering. While the underwater ambush waits, the air above the Gulf begins to fill with a different kind of noise and a new threat vector. The fifth tactic in this asymmetric playbook is the mass deployment of loitering munitions and attack drones to saturate the airspace. We have witnessed the global proliferation of the Shahed series drones, cheap airframes built with commercial off-the-shelf components available anywhere. These are not high-performance aircraft. They are slow, loud, and relatively fragile in a one-on-one engagement against a fighter jet. However, their strength lies in their unit cost, which is often less than $20,000 per individual airframe. A Patriot missile used to intercept such a drone costs approximately $4 million per shot, creating an unsustainable economic exchange. This cost ratio, 200 to 1, is functionally unsustainable for any military logistics system, no matter how well funded it may be. Iran can launch waves of drones day after day, forcing the defender to deplete high-value interceptors on low-value aerial trash. The strategic goal is to bankrupt the air defense network, creating gaps that larger, more destructive ballistic missiles can then exploit. Drones also act as decoys, lighting up enemy radars.
We have multiple bogies in the Bravo
their
sector.
electronic
I need
signatures
identification
to
now.
anti-radiation missiles. Once a radar turns on to track a drone swarm, it becomes a beacon for destruction, revealing its location to the enemy. The swarm does not need to be intelligent. It only needs to be numerous enough to clog the sky and confuse the defense. Intelligence reports suggest Iran has stockpiled thousands of these units in hardened bunkers along the coast, ready for rapid mass deployment. They can be launched from trucks, ship decks, or simple racks hidden in the desert scrub, making preemptive strikes nearly impossible. Beyond the kinetic strike, these drones serve as the primary sensor node for a massive, unblinking surveillance network that covers the entire Gulf. A carrier group relies on stealth and electronic masking for survival, but 50 distinct eyes in the sky make hiding effectively impossible. This real-time data stream feeds precise firing solutions to the ballistic missile forces waiting inland, removing the guesswork from long-range targeting. The drone does not have to destroy the ship itself. It only has to provide the coordinates for the heavy hitters to finish the job. This creates a transparent battlefield where every movement of the adversary is tracked, cataloged, and targeted in real time. Defending against this requires constant radar emission, which paradoxically makes the fleet even more visible to passive electronic warfare sensors. It is a strategic loop. Stay silent and get spotted by optics, or go active and get spotted by electromagnetic sensors.
As you can see, the red line indicates a sharp decline in overall morale across the last 2 quarters. We need to address this immediately.
But the Iranian strategy extends far beyond the naval assets floating in the water to the very foundations of American power. Warfare is an exercise in logistics, and the U.S. Navy is tethered to a massive stationary support infrastructure that cannot move. Tactic 6 is the systematic destruction of the logistic nodes and forward bases that sustain the American military presence in the region. The 5th Fleet is headquartered in Bahrain, a fixed geographical point with known coordinates and vulnerabilities that cannot be armored. Air wings rely on massive air bases in Qatar and the UAE for refueling, heavy maintenance, and munitions storage. Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, the largest in the Middle East, is specifically designed to target these fixed installations with overwhelming force. Precision-guided variants like the Fateh 110 can strike specific hangars, fuel depots, and command centers with pinpoint accuracy. Destroying the pier facilities in Bahrain forces the U.S. Navy to resupply at sea, a slow, vulnerable, and weather-dependent process. Hitting the fuel farms in Jebel Ali cripples the operational range of the air dominance fighters, grounding them before they can fight. Modern warfare is rate-limited by the consumption of supplies. Cut the supply lines, and the most advanced war machine grinds to a halt. This approach is known as chain breaking, targeting the weakest links in the adversary's operational chain rather than their strongest armor. The defensive systems, like Patriot batteries protecting these bases, face the same saturation problem as the ships at sea. A volley of 50 missiles, mixed with distinct decoys, will mathematically penetrate the defensive umbrella through sheer volume of targets. Furthermore, Iran threatens the critical infrastructure of the host nations themselves, creating immense political friction within the alliance. A strike on a desalination plant or a power grid in a host country raises the domestic cost of the alliance to unbearable levels. If the civilian population of a Gulf state loses water and power, political pressure to eject U.S. forces mounts immediately. This is warfare on a diplomatic level, executed through precise kinetic targeting of dual-use infrastructure to shatter political will. The goal is to make the host nations view the American presence as a liability to their survival rather than a security guarantee. Without these regional bases, the U.S. Navy is forced to operate from over the horizon, drastically reducing its combat effectiveness. Flight times increase, sortie rates drop significantly, and the time on station for aircraft is cut in half due to fuel constraints. Every mile the carrier is forced to retreat from the coast reduces the pressure it can project inland against the adversary. To survive these inevitable counterstrikes, Iran has moved its own essential capabilities deep underground. Over the last 2 decades, engineers have excavated massive subterranean complexes known as missile cities deep within the Zagros Mountains. These bunkers are buried hundreds of meters beneath layers of solid rock and reinforced concrete, immune to conventional airstrikes. They house launch systems, fuel storage, manufacturing lines, and command and control centers in a secure, self-sustaining environment. Satellite imagery cannot penetrate this depth, meaning the U.S. has imperfect intelligence on the arsenal's readiness or specific locations. Standard bunker-busting munitions are ineffective against facilities buried this deep within mountain ranges.
All
this
units,
ensures
this is command.
Strike
failed. Mobilize
even if
defense.
the surface is scorched by
Damage
American
report
air power.
now.
The
We need status
retaliation will
updates on
launch
all
from below.
sectors.
The tunnels are designed with multiple redundant exits, allowing launchers to surface, fire, and retreat before counterfire arrives. This creates a whack-a-mole dynamic where superior air power chases fleeting targets while exposing itself to air defenses. The survivability of these assets guarantees that a conflict cannot be won by a swift, decisive decapitation strike. Any war scenario becomes a drawn-out attrition slugfest, which is exactly the environment the U.S. seeks to avoid. The integration of these subterranean bases with mobile surface units creates a resilient, redundant defense network that is hard to kill. Communications run through buried fiber optic lines, immune to radio jamming and electronic interception by Western intelligence. The command structure is decentralized, allowing local commanders to execute pre-planned defense sectors autonomously if central command is lost. If the central command in Tehran is severed, the kill box in the Strait of Hormuz continues to function automatically.
Sell everything right now, it's gone!
Prevents the defense from collapsing
We have to
under
pull the
shock
annuities,
of
the
an
whole
initial
sector is
shock and
collapsing.
awe bombing campaign. The entire military doctrine is built around the assumption of fighting while outnumbered and outgunned in a long war. It focuses on imposing cost, inflicting pain, and denying the enemy a clean, decisive victory at any price. But the most potent weapon in the Iranian arsenal is not military at all. It is economic leverage over the world. The Strait of Hormuz is the jugular vein of the global energy market, and Iran effectively holds the knife to it.
We have to
Closing the
sell!
strait,
It's collapsing!
even for a few days,
I can't believe
sends
this is
a shockwave
happening.
through the global economy that no superpower
And so the cycle
can ignore.
continues.
An effective blockade does not require a physical barrier. It only requires a credible, lethal threat to civilian shipping lanes. If a single tanker is struck by a mine or missile, the global insurance markets for maritime transit will evaporate instantly. Without valid insurance, no commercial captain will enter the Gulf, and the flow of 18 million barrels a day stops immediately. The price of oil would likely double overnight, triggering hyperinflation and a deep recession across the industrialized Western world. This turns the global economy into a hostage, forcing European and Asian nations to pressure the United States to de-escalate. Iran understands that the center of gravity in a modern conflict is often the wallet of the average Western voter. By threatening the stability of the global energy grid, they create a political shield that is harder to penetrate than armor. The military calculation changes fundamentally when every tactical engagement risks collapsing the stock markets in London and New York. This leverage forces the adversary to act with extreme caution, slowing down the operational tempo to a predictable crawl. But the defense of Iran does not begin at the Iranian border. It begins thousands of miles away with forward defense. The axis of resistance serves as an external buffer zone, ensuring that any war is fought on Arab soil, not Persian. Hezbollah in Lebanon is the crown jewel of this strategy, possessing an arsenal that rivals many standing European armies. With over 150,000 missiles pointed at Israel, Hezbollah creates a massive strategic distraction for U.S. planners. In the event of a U.S. strike on Iran, Hezbollah opens a second front that the West cannot simply ignore. This forces the U.S. to divert carrier groups and air defense assets to the Mediterranean to protect its primary regional ally. Dividing the attacking force dilutes its combat power, making the primary mission in the Persian Gulf significantly harder to execute. Meanwhile, in Iraq and Syria, Shia militias threaten the remaining U.S. ground bases with constant harassing rocket fire. These low-intensity attacks create a constant drain on resources and political will, forcing a strategy of death by 1,000 cuts. The militias are expendable assets. The Iranian officers directing them from the shadows are protected and deniable. This plausible deniability allows Iran to strike American interests directly while avoiding direct state-on-state retaliation. But the most disruptive element of this forward defense has emerged in the southern approaches of the Red Sea. The Houthi rebels in Yemen have transformed from a ragtag mountain militia into a strategic anti-ship force armed with cruise missiles. Controlling the Bab el-Mandeb Strait creates a secondary choke point, allowing Iran to threaten the Suez Canal route from a distance. We have seen the efficacy of this strategy as commercial shipping is forced to reroute thousands of miles around Africa. The U.S. Navy is forced to deploy destroyers to the Red Sea to shoot down $20,000 drones with $2 million missiles. This is a resource trap. The U.S. is bleeding inventory and money to keep a waterway open that it does not own. Every interceptor fired in the Red Sea is one less interceptor available for the defense of the carrier in the Gulf. Iran essentially outsources the attrition of the U.S. Navy to a proxy force that has absolutely nothing to lose. The Houthis can absorb airstrikes indefinitely. Their infrastructure is decentralized, primitive, and highly resilient to bombing. Trying to bomb the Houthi launch sites is like trying to destroy a localized weather system with a rifle. This geographic dispersion stretches the U.S. surveillance capabilities to the breaking point across the entire Middle East. Satellites and reconnaissance planes cannot watch the Gulf, the Levant, and the Red Sea simultaneously with equal fidelity. Gaps in coverage inevitably appear, and it is through these gaps that the Iranian supply lines continue to flow. The proxy network also provides human intelligence, spotting U.S. movements and relaying data back to Tehran in real time. It is a human sensor web that covers the entire region, impossible to jam, hack, or switch off. The cultural and religious ties that bind these groups create a loyalty that cannot be broken by sanctions or bribes. This ideological cohesion is a force multiplier that Western military planners frequently underestimate in their war games. Iran has effectively built a land bridge of influence stretching from Tehran to the Mediterranean Sea. This logistical corridor allows for the rapid movement of advanced weaponry to the front lines of the proxy war. Attempts to interdict these convoys have been only partially successful due to the sheer volume and redundancy of traffic. The strategy is resilient because it is redundant. Close one road and 2 smuggling routes open through the desert. Ultimately, this network forces the U.S. to calculate the cost of a regional war, not just a localized strike. A conflict with Iran is instantly a conflict in 4 or 5 different countries simultaneously. The diplomatic bandwidth required to manage such a chaotic conflagration is immense and paralyzing for any administration. This paralysis is the goal. Delay creates opportunities for negotiation, survival, and strategic retrenchment. While the proxies fight the exterior battle, the internal defense relies on electronic and cyber warfare. Iran has invested heavily in GPS spoofing technology, capable of drifting the navigation systems of ships and planes. We have seen commercial tankers inadvertently veer into Iranian waters after their navigation systems were subtly manipulated. Tactical spoofing turns a precision-guided munition into an unguided projectile with a circular error probability of miles. By creating a localized GPS denial zone, Iran forces the U.S. military to rely on inertial navigation, which degrades over time. Alongside jamming signals, Iranian cyber units target the soft underbelly of the deployment, logistics software, and communications networks. A successful cyber intrusion does not need to launch a missile. It only needs to corrupt the fuel manifests or maintenance logs to ground the fleet. To protect these assets, Iran has constructed an integrated air defense system that is dense, overlapping, and highly resilient. They rely on a ground-based denial strategy, utilizing advanced surface-to-air missile systems like the Bavar 373 to deny high-altitude access. This functions as a gatekeeper, forcing attacking aircraft to fly low, directly into the teeth of short-range defenses like the Tor M1. Even stealth platforms like the F-35 face a critical threat from Iran's heavy investment in passive radar technology. Passive radars do not emit a signal. They listen for the reflections of ambient radio waves bouncing off the aircraft's fuselage. By triangulating these disruptions, defenders can attain a track of the intruder without ever triggering the pilot's warning systems. The goal is not to shoot down every plane, but to make the airspace so contested that the sortie generation rate collapses. The air defense network is highly mobile. A battery can fire and relocate within 5 minutes, complicating the suppression of enemy air defense's mission. For every real radar destroyed,
the conflict between nations is rarely about land or resources.
On cheap metal
it is,
and
at its heart,
emitters. This
Intel
brings us back to the
confirms red
central
activity
theme.
in the Strait.
The United States
We need to
military is
neutralize those
designed for
batteries
quick,
before the main
decisive
fleet
wars.
arrives.
Iran is
Acknowledged.
designed
Sending
for a
the
cheap,
strike package
protracted
now.
slugfest. Wargaming simulations like the Millennium Challenge 2002 frequently show that a conflict in the Gulf results in catastrophic naval losses. While tactics have evolved, the fundamental physics of the engagement in the narrow strait have not changed, and the cage remains deadly. Losing a single aircraft carrier would be a strategic and psychological blow from which the U.S. Navy might never fully recover. The risk aversion created by this possibility grants Iran a zone of immunity where they can operate below the threshold of total war. But if the blaze does spark, the strategy shifts from deterrence to scorched earth and mutual economic destruction. The objective
They called it
becomes
a
to burn
stimulus.
down the energy
In truth,
infrastructure of the
it was a
entire
pact
region,
with ruin.
ensuring no one benefits
collapse
from the oil
was
if
immediate.
Iran cannot. We saw a preview of this in the 2019 Al-Qaeda attack, where a handful of drones took out half of Saudi Arabia's oil production in minutes. This scorched strait policy transforms the conflict from a military calculation into a global economic suicide pact. No missile defense shield can fully protect the sprawling, vulnerable infrastructure of the global energy market from mass saturation. The United States faces a dilemma. It can win the naval war, but it will lose the economic base, leaving the global economy in ruins. Iran has successfully inverted the traditional dynamic of power projection, forcing the superpower into a reactive, defensive crouch. Every American maneuver is a response to an Iranian provocation. An exhausting posture that is financially unsustainable over decades. Meanwhile, Iran continues to learn, adapting drone tactics from the war in Ukraine and integrating AI-driven swarms. If Iran acquires a functional nuclear deterrent, the entire conventional calculus becomes cemented forever, backed by the ultimate insurance policy. Even without the bomb, the sheer density of threats has created a de facto no-go zone for casual intervention. We are witnessing a historical shift where geography and cheap technology defeat tonnage, budget, and prestige.
This analysis is worthless now.
I
warned you the projections were too optimistic.
Is becoming a symbol of high-stakes
exactly are we
risk
supposed to
and
tell the
potential
board?
disaster. Future naval conflicts will not be decided by who has the biggest ship, but by who controls the information space and the cost curve. Iran has written the playbook for how a middle power can checkmate a superpower by building a fortress without walls.
You need to move your vessel immediately!
Not a chance! We are staying right here!
Into their greatest strategic ally. The U.S. Navy remains the most powerful force on the planet, but power is useless if the cost of using it exceeds the value of the objective. Strategic paralysis is the result of a cost-benefit analysis that no longer balances in favor of intervention. The Pentagon knows that entering the straits is walking into a trap.
That's it. It's over. We have a technical knockout.
And so, the fleets watch each other across the narrow water, locked in a tense, dangerous standoff, defined by friction and fear. The friction.
Thank you so much for dining with us. We hope to see you again soon.
Inch by inch, waiting for the inevitable mistake. But if the order is given, the noise will become a deafening roar that shatters the status quo and the global economy. The outcome of such a clash would not be a clean victory, but a messy, catastrophic disruption that serves Iranian interests. They do not train to defeat the U.S. Navy in a fair fight. They train to ensure the fight is never, ever fair. They have redefined what winning looks like. It is not about raising a flag, but about surviving and exacting a price the world cannot pay. This creates a stalemate where the stronger power is rendered powerless by the risks of action and the certainty of economic ruin. Iran's goal isn't victory in the traditional sense. It is disruption, survival, and the weaponization of chaos. The trap is set, the physics are absolute, and the geography is unforgiving to those who ignore it. So the real question remains, echoing through the halls of power in Washington and Tehran alike. Can the United States Navy afford to win a war that bankrupts the world?